Hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly King, and I'm the co-founder of One Island Institute and the Pangea Challenge. It is my privilege today to introduce a very special guest. Her name is Cherry Steinwender. She is the co-founder of the Center for the Healing of Racism. Cherry has dedicated her life to changing the conversation in America and in the world, and helping to co-create a more just and more compassionate society for all of us. It is my privilege today to introduce Cherry and to open up a very important conversation in America and the world about where we are, where we go from here. Welcome, Cherry. Nice to meet you here.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, for giving me this opportunity to once again address more people, to address your audience, and to be able to really open up their hearts. Because I believe if enough people understand how we were conditioned to play out us and them, then there will be no need for having these conversations in the future if we could just understand where we stand and sit right now.
Amen. Well, I know, Cherry, as I mentioned at the beginning, that you have been hosting this conversation and trying to move us along as a people for most of your life and career. Tell me a little bit about your background and the center.
Well, before I got that name Steinwender, my last name was King. So you see that we may be at least 52nd cousins to each other. Born and raised in Louisiana, grew up under a system of Jim Crow that was totally devastating to the human psyche as well as to the soul. And maybe all of those experiences that I had under Jim Crow segregation gave me the opportunity to be very clear thinking, to be a part of forming an organization in 1989 that is entitled the Center for the Healing of Racism. And looking at, you already mentioned to your audience, that I am one of the co-founders, and I want your audience to really see the people that started all of this. We were third generation Japanese American. We were Puerto Rican American. We were African American and European Americans. And in looking at all of those people from different global backgrounds in the world, we decided at one time in 1989 that something we've never did before was to begin to have a conversation around racism. And what is very interesting, these conversations were held in each other's, homes around the kitchen table with no intentions of forming a nonprofit organization. But as we went along and we invited other people to have these conversations. And what we learned in the very beginning is that everybody in this country have been hurt around racism. I want you to absorb that because I'm going to follow it up with it really doesn't matter how white your skin is or shades of brown. But for most people, it's very obvious based on a history in this country how people of color have been hurt around racism. But white people hardly ever sit down and think and take that journey with themselves to be able to understand that how they've been hurt. And I want your audience to know very clearly, we never ever try to play the oppression game. My oppression is greater than yours, because oppression is oppression. And regardless of who you are, if you say you have been hurt, that's your reality. And who am I to try to say, oh, well, after all, you haven't been hurt enough, or et cetera and et cetera. So Because I am one of the founding members of this organization, we could have named ourselves anything. We could have named ourselves the Center for Combating Racism, the Center for Fighting Racism, Dismantling Racism, Erasing Racism. We could have named it anything we wanted to, but we focused on healing for the reason that I just said. We've all been hurt around racism. And if that is the truth, which we believe it, our foundation is set upon that we should have spaces where we could come together to begin to heal those hurts, to be able to say anything and everything that we want to say in a safe, loving, and supported atmosphere. So this is the work that we have been doing all of these years, as creating that space. And we have had dialogues. We have traveled to 45 states already and 2 countries, giving people the opportunity to see how racism have impacted their lives.
I didn't know that history. So thank you for sharing that background, how rich and far it reaches, first of all, and that your origins started the most beautiful and purest way that most meaningful things do. People sharing their truth from their heart with one another and creating a safe space. I too have committed most of my life to that. It continues to be the most humbling and most inspiring work that I'm ever privileged to sit at the feet of one another and learn together how we navigate and how we become who we were born to be. So that's a beautiful beginning. And from the beginning of your story, I really appreciate that you have brought us all into the story, regardless of where we start our story, regardless of the color of our skin or our nationality, because I too believe this is a conversation about everybody and for everybody. And the folks that will be listening to our conversation today are from around the world and every shade of beautiful skin, but hopefully what we can share by choice is an open heart and an open mind. So, Cherry, while we know that this is a long conversation just in your life and mine and in the world, we also know that in this present time, there has been, sadly and significantly and essentially, an increase in conversation lately because of the current events of our country and world. That while it is not new, the conversation that we are in is not new, but the current events have put it so front and center, and that's also the role that technology plays in the evolution of our dialogue, because things that one can look away from, or it's not right in your house, now it's in everybody's house. No one can look away unless they just want to. And so part of the catalyst for our conversation today is to embrace this moment, to recognize this moment as an important intersection in this dialogue. Let's talk about what's happening today. I imagine there has been a real increase in conversation from the center and some of that, because I know in my own life and circles, the interest in having this dialogue upgrade and move into something that we can put into action. I've never seen momentum like this, or at least that I recall. I'm excited about that. Tell us more about what you think is happening today.
I think the very first thing that I want to address, that for 31 years, we have been talking about racism.
Yes.
In our name, the word racism is in our name. And that word racism all of these years have been such an uncomfortable word until most people with skin tones lighter than, no, I'm going to say with most white people, didn't want to have this conversation. I want to let it be known also that white people have actually said to me, well, why you want to use racism in the name of your organization? Oh, why don't you just change the name? And I would look at them, I said, that's not an option. But you see, I'm not healing from multiculturalism. I'm healing from racism. And to be able to use that word for 31 years, and it was only recently with the death of George Floyd, May the 23rd of this year, that death made this word okay for everybody to use it, broadly. But you see, we've been doing this and using that word for 31 years. So let me go back and say that one of the reasons why it's so hard to dismantle racism is because too many of us don't understand what racism is. Sometimes if you listen closely, you will hear people say racism and prejudice is the same thing, and they are not. Prejudice, by sheer definition, prejudge, something you're unaware of, forming opinions without sufficient data. That's what prejudice is. And then you look at racism and people say, well, I'm not, a racist, even though this organization have never called anyone a racist in 31 years. I'm only using that now as an example of what people have said, because I've never told racist jokes. I've never called anyone a very bad name. I haven't hit anyone. And I'm going to use this one because this actually happened to a child walking home from school. And here she was spit on. So you see, I never did do that. So you see, I'm not a racist. I'm okay. But the bottom line is to really be able to understand racism, you have to look at an institution that was created in this country to play out us and them. It's an institution. And the way that this institution worked, so you wasn't around when they created all these laws, neither was I. But these laws under this institution have affected all of us. I will say also that when you look at the institution itself, what is the formula? And I think that your listening audience could really wrap their heads around this because it's a very fast equation. Prejudice plus power. And write it down. Prejudice plus power equals racism. Now, the people that's in power, the people that had all the power, used all of those negative, prejudice they had about different people of color. It really doesn't matter. The indigenous people of this country being called savages and all these other things, it really didn't matter whether it was people of African descent that was brought here to use all of the negative stereotypes about them and to be able to have the policy, the power to make laws and policies around that. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about individual acts of meanness or individual acts of kindness. However, this is how this system shows up. But you have to understand that. And now to be able to understand that, then we can go back to the conversation that you want to have about present day time. So for 31 years, we've been calling it racism. We have heard from more people within the last month than we've had in 2 years. Because now people, it's almost like they have been given a pass. It's really okay to use the word racism. It's really okay now. And in fact, in using it, they're looking at it. Institutionalized racism, structural racism, systemic racism. See, they're using all of this now, and it really doesn't matter if you're in the faith communities, the political arena, the educational system, whatever. Everybody's using the word now. So that's the reason why it's okay and why so many people are contacting us. But when you look at, and the people globally that saw George Floyd being lynched, and I use the word lynch because when you lynch a person, you are obstructing their airwaves, stopping them from breathing, and that's exactly what happened. It was a modern day lynching. And I know historically, 4,000 plus people of African descent was lynched in this country. And at many of these lynchings, invitations were sent out verbally that letting the community know today we will have a lynching. And people would show up and they would bring young kids to these lynchings. But you see, they got invitations to the lynching. I know in Macomb, Georgia, at the lynching of one male, there were over 3,000 people showed up, and it was a really big holiday because they were selling candy, cookies, soda waters, and everything else, a real gala. But you got an invitation to come and see it. I turned on my television set, as many people in this country, and all of a sudden we saw a modern day lynching. And the saddest part about it, I didn't ask to see that. It was there. And once you see it, you can never, ever unsee it. It's there. You see it. And I don't know if it will ever be erased from our minds. And maybe I don't want it to be erased because it will give something in everybody's head of why they went out with all of the protests that has been happening across the world. In countries where people, they don't even speak English, and they're carrying signs, Black Lives Matter. They are carrying signs with the name of George Floyd. So the history books in the future, if you will be truthful about history, his name will be in the history books. And so I will say, I agree with you. I'm older than you, but I've never seen anything like what we have witnessed in the terms of protests. I've never seen this before, not globally. The other thing that I look at when I am processing all of this information, when we first came out, the woman that coined Black Lives Matter and how it was so trivialized, and too many people were going, all lives matter. Well, I did a lot of interviews from the media, and I said I want to start off first and foremost saying, I am a true believer in all lives matter, and all of the work that I have been doing for 31 years can attest to that. All lives matter. But I also know within this country, Black lives have never mattered. Black lives have never mattered from the time that we were brought to this country in chains, from the times of all those 4,000 some lynchings. Our lives have never mattered. And so what we are just saying to the world, that our lives matter. And it's not to negate that other people's lives don't matter and blue lives matter and all of, this, it's, to me, it's been dismissive that my life matters. My life should matter in this country for a lot of reasons, but I think that it shouldn't matter too because we built this country. It was built on our sweat, on our blood. We built this country, and that should matter.
Yes, it should. And yes, it does.
So,
Cherry, before we scheduled for today in our early conversation, we committed to each other that we'd speak truth, that the only reason we would even have this conversation is to bring some truth from our own voices and hearts and invite other people to step in to that. I want to tell you that I think it's disingenuous for most, if not all, I'll say definitely most, of white people to say that they don't understand that there is a difference in experience based on skin color. I have always understood that. I didn't understand why, but I understood that it was happening, or I didn't think about it day to day because I had the privilege not to. So it wasn't something I paid attention to moment by moment, but I became aware as a child that there were differences in attitudes. I never saw anything overt that I read about in history. I never saw someone mistreated in my presence, or that I could say was discrimination in front of me. Yet somehow I understood before it was defined to me that we had a difference in experiences. And that now there is language for those of us who want to understand and help make this right and help make this a better world for all of us, is what was in place that was making that true, even if me as an individual wasn't doing it. Where was it coming from? And I think this opportunity to examine the foundations that have become a way of life and navigating, that someone created those foundations and someone can change them. And we're someone. We're the someones that can redesign and redefine and make a place for all to stand, where all lives matter will not be a dismissal, it will be where we have finally arrived. But I had to come to understand Black Lives Matter, not that Black Lives Matter, but that distinction and why I stand so strongly for that distinction now. I appreciate that you bridged them, because we want a world where these conversations will one day only be in the history books. They'll tell what we used to speak about, but we're a long way from that day. Cherry, I'm sad to say, but I believe we're on our way, if we want to be, to do that.
And so
what do we need to be doing to get there?
Well, let me say to you, I really appreciate what you said about showing up and being real. Because all too often, I like to tell the audience, you see, really, I'm not here to look good. I'm here to look real. However, I can look good.
You do look good.
But I got that. And what was showing up looking real. Showing up looking real means I'm going to be totally transparent. I'm going to be transparent with your audience.
Yes.
And when I talked about growing up in Louisiana under those deep Jim Crow laws that was put into place that kept me separated from white kids. And in fact, I'm surrounded in red. But because of the Jim Crow segregation and those laws and the images that I saw of Black people, the majority of my life, I couldn't wear red lipstick. I couldn't wear red clothes at all. Because I grew up at a time and on too many lawns of white homeowners, I saw these jet black lawn jockeys, blood red lips, blood red jacket, bulging white eyes and jet black skin. And for me to wear red psychologically, or to put red lipstick on, I took on that's what I would look like. You see, so here I'm surrounded in red because I have taken that journey inward to heal myself. So so interesting that here I am now. I can wear red lipstick and I can wear red clothes, but that's a journey, and that's what I want to speak to now with your listening audience. And I want to start the conversation off about where do we go next. The conversation should always start off, number one. Everybody's trying to fix humanity, but nobody wants to fix himself. I think we should start there.
Absolutely.
If you want to know what you can do, the first thing you should do, everybody, is start working on yourself. And what does this working on yourself look like? And because you have a very international audience, this is going to take different dimensions for different people in different countries. For people in South Africa to look at and take that journey inward, you can't take that journey inward without acknowledging the apartheid system. If you were in Nigeria, you can't have this conversation, take this journey inward, unless you look at the colonialization and indirect rule that happened in Nigeria. And in taking this conversation inward, for people sitting in the United States, and it varies because of age, but for me, when I took that journey inward, I had to deal with the fact that when I had a little book as a child and was being read to by adults, none of those children in that book looked like me. And then when I went to school, none of the kids in the books that I learned to read at in the educational system, none of those people looked like me. And then when I went to church, and if there were any visualizations in the Bible, there were maybe 2 pictures of somebody that looked like me, that's probably standing up half naked, fanning the pharaohs. And then every image in the homes of people that I went to that was Christian, Jesus was white, blonde, and blue-eyed. It was held up totally as a symbol of what goodness is. So to be white had to be, that's the symbol of goodness. And we always use and see things in opposites. So if that is the symbol of goodness, and here I am black, what am I the symbol of? And then you have to take that journey into when you turned on the television, people in significant roles, who did they look like? And so I could play this thing out. But if psychologists or people that study behavior, human behavior, the last stat that I can remember is that by the time you're 7 years old, you have been completely molded. Mm-hmm. So why is it a little child in a kindergarten, this is how young it starts. A little child in the kindergarten, they observed this little child moving her little mat to take a nap all the way across the room. And when the teachers asked her why was she moving her mat, she said, because I don't want to sleep next to her, and she used the N word, and she said they smell bad. So where did that child get that from? You see, these lessons sometimes come to us by people we love and trust the most. Our parents, there to teach us how to see the world. And I want your audience to know I never call parents bad. It doesn't mean that your parents were bad. They did the best they could with the information they were given. So now, once you understand how you were conditioned, it is up to you. See, getting sick with the disease of racism wasn't your fault, but getting well is your responsibility. Getting well is your responsibility. And I want you then, after you take that journey into that deep, dark night of the soul, and be able to understand your conditioning, then I want you to align yourself with organizations, or maybe could start first with somebody that you love and trust the most, and start having these conversations. Somebody that looked different from you, so you can truly understand that life for me, Kimberly, is totally different from your life. And it has nothing to do with the state you were born or grew up in. It's just that how you were born and presented to the world. And so the next thing that you can do is to be able to read publications about people of different ethnic origins than yourself. And right now, there is today is known as the day Blackout 2020. And what that means is to shop only at stores and to deal with people, do business only with people, Black people. So Blackout Day. Now, the reason that I feel that's important, because a lot of times our shopping is just habit. We're going to run to this stores out of habit. You know, we never even think about other stores, but just to say, I'm going to shop at only Black-owned businesses. That takes a lot of effort and a lot of work, because most of the people within Houston, Texas don't even know where the Black-owned businesses are. So you see, that takes a lot of work. It makes you think. So the other thing that I would say is, and what you do next, for me, I'm going to tell your listening audience, I don't tell anyone to do anything I've not done myself. And when I say to you that I have been educating people globally, but I could also say, I'm just not running out there telling people, you know, what they should do and educating them. Those people sit around my kitchen table, and that's where real relationships are made. You know, I could show up at any arena, but unless I can say to you, you know what? I'm gonna give you a picture of what my life really looked like. I've been sleeping with a white, blonde, blue-eyed man for the last 39 years, been married to the man. Came to Houston, Texas, didn't even speak English, was on holiday and didn't go home for 7 years. But there are 5 women in the United States that call me mother. And so I label them as my firstborn is from Hong Kong. My secondborn is European American, and she's in Providence, Rhode Island. My third is from Guatemala. My 4th child is from Taiwan. And my 5th child is from Beijing. That's the baby. But you see, it doesn't stop there. This one man graduated from the MD Anderson Hospital, and he's from India. So when his mother came to his graduation, I took all of them out for dinner, and she said to me, Cherry, you will be Prasad's mother here in the United States. And there's people on the waiting list that want to be the ones to call me mother. But I said, no, I'm out of the mother business now, because I can't keep up with that many children. So I want people to know that I'm not just running around there running my mouth. And as I said before, I want to look real, not good. Good is secondary.
So many things that I want to sit with that you're sharing, Cherry. I think I want to bring forward, not necessarily in sequence, but in things that touch me about this conversation. And in your invitation to take this personally and make it personal. Now, I'm all for broad-based fundamental education, like learn where things come from. But if you want to change your life, change your engagement with it. When, as a daughter of the South, and when I was coming up, we were past segregation, but we were a long way past the attitudes. That's a truth, again, that I'm supposed to whitewash, that I'm not going to. And how I escaped some of that becoming my conditioning, not that it isn't there, but different than some, is directly related to my experience. Is somehow I began to change my reality of who my friends were, what kind of rooms I was in, and let life change me. Let life touch me. Let people touch me. I could never go back to blind prejudice or summarily thinking because my truth told me something different. My life told me something different. And I think that's the most beautiful, most powerful way to change the truth for all of us, is to engage with this family of ours from across the spectrum. I know when my husband and I were married, we've got our 20-year anniversary coming next year. I never did anything for 20 years, Sherry. That's a big deal for me. And we've been together longer than that. But our first parties and at our wedding, the most important compliment I think we got is they said, your parties and your wedding looks like the United Nations. And those were our real friends. And so I want to invite people to do more than peer through the window. I want them to fling open the doors of their possibility. I'm not after tolerance. I'm after embrace. Tolerance beats intolerance, but it doesn't beat engagement. It doesn't beat embrace. And the fact that we can create a completely different kind of community, and it's right here in front of us, centimeters away from a different reality. So I want to make sure that I'm putting an invitation out there to go a lot further than peer through the window from history or policy, but make this incredibly personal. We could be the generation that changes this story in every way, starting in our own heart, starting in our own life, starting in our own house. And I wouldn't trade that truth. It's the most beautiful reality I get to live into every day in this country and around the world. So I want to thank you for making it richer than a bunch of do's and don'ts, because this is our humanity we're talking about, and it's been injured. It's been corrupted before most of us got to this story. This story was already perverted and broken and corrupted. And I can't change that it happened, but I can change what happens next. I can change what happens from here. And I posted on social media recently that you have a moral obligation, responsibility to personally become more ethical than the society you grew up in. We don't choose where we start, but we choose where we go. And right now, we've got some listening, we've got some learning, we've got some healing, and we've got some choosing to do. And we need this to be a raw, real conversation, not a finger pointing, but of heart opening. And tangibly figuring out, how do I change it in me? How do I change it with me? And how do I do it with you? Can you talk to us a little bit more about what I do tomorrow? And I want to step back because people are hearing words. I'm not sure I remember being called an ally. I am an ally based on what I understand that word, but I'm a friend. I'm committed to beloved community.
Well, let me say the word ally.
Yeah, can you educate us on what does that mean? We're hearing that today. What does that mean?
You know, we've been listening to the word ally for years because, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I know the United States in course of military language. They use ally all the time of all these different countries that they have formed alliances with, all these different countries in order to achieve a military strategy that this country is our ally and all. So you see, we've been using this word, hearing it all the time. And so now we have to understand, what does an ally mean? It's just one that we form an alliance with to achieve an objective. And so now we are looking at and finding other people that could look different from us in order to form an alliance, to be an ally, to achieve an objective. And the objective now that we are talking about is around racism, okay? So let me look at that and walk you through this alliance, forming an ally. And one of the, if you want to be an ally for me, or I be an ally for you, you have to truly understand what you're walking into. And you have to even know something about me as I have to know something about you. I can't just automatically push myself and be your ally. But when you talked about beloved community, it reminded me of Martin Luther King. In Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, he listed about 5 white people. And he didn't use the word ally because I guess in 1963, when he wrote the letter, that wasn't a popular term. But he named all these white people, and that's exactly what they were. They were allies in the struggle for the civil rights in this country. And I want your audience to look them up, these allies. I know Rev McGill, Lillian Smith, Ann Dahl. So I want you to look them up. So the thing of it is, and I want to say also that a project that I'm working on hard is to do research to find as many white allies as possible. And the reason that I want to do this, because I know, and I say that there's always been clear thinking white people, regardless of what the oppression was called globally, they've always been clear thinking white people. And I think the world needs to know about them. And I think that it will do 2 things. Number one, it helps offset the shame and the guilt that I've heard come out of the mouths of too many white people in 31 years. To know that there've always been clear thinking white folks that stood up against racism, oppression, homophobia, xenophobia, whatever the issue is. But at the same time, for people of color, it gives us an opportunity to see, wow, there's always been white people. Even Martin Luther King said, though few in number, but high in substance, there've always been substance in white people that stood up against oppression. And so those stories need to be told. And I've already started the book called White Allies Missing Pieces. So an ally, a person that aligns with another to achieve the objective. And many people are afraid to step into that space for fear of making mistakes. And I heard just recently, the greatest lessons that was most long-lived came out of making mistakes. And the bottom line is, if I step into the arena to be an ally for someone, I hope they would say to me that, you know, we both may make mistakes, but I hope that mistakes are occasion for learning and forgiving. And don't think that you're not going to make mistakes, because you are. You are. But to be able to embrace those mistakes and turn them into growth experiences. And so in training people of European descent to work for the center, that's one of the things I always say, that don't worry about the mistakes. Don't worry about them, because you will make them. I make mistakes. But what I know is, as long as I feel your heart is pure, you can make all the mistakes that you want to.
Well, I remember in our conversation that and as I said, I've done dialogue in Richmond, Virginia, where race relations were flaring up, and we had to be brave in those conversations. There was a lot of tension. I've been in dialogues in restorative justice where people have been killed and the community is torn apart. So I'm accustomed to stepping in where the people are walking out the door, because someone needs to be willing to make that space real and safe, not sterilized, real. And it's uncomfortable and it's necessary, because on the other side is the promise of healing and something better. But I have to say, I had a new timidness, even as I felt my conviction that I have to do more. I want to do more. Now is the moment. I need to act. We need to act. Dealing with my own shame for a skin color I didn't choose, for a history I didn't write, for mistakes I knew I'd make and was afraid. But I was more afraid of doing nothing than doing something wrong. But I remember opening the conversation with you and saying, will it be okay if I'm earnest? Will you help me? And it's important that we be able to meet each other right there in the space of earnest intention and teachable moments, and get up and keep going, because the time of shaming in each other, we need to move beyond the shaming and into responsibility and into growth and into whatever that fabric of beloved community. How can we get closer to that promised land? That's my prayer. There's a promise in there for us, and it's made of us. We're that promise to do that.
And you know, you started off this conversation with listening, and within that conversation, I heard you use the word listening. And so I think to end the conversation with listening is very appropriate, and to be able to be a true listener. And as I've said, repeated from something I heard or saw on one of the films that the center owned, where this professor of a major university, he said, we need to start a listening revolution in this country, because we don't even know how to listen. And listening, what Gandhi said, the greatest gift that you could give to another human being is to be totally present in your listening. Now, what does that mean? That if I ask you to listen to me and you start giving me advice, you haven't done what I asked. When I ask you to listen to me, I just want you to be silent. I want you to clear everything out of your head. I don't want you to be thinking about what you're going to cook tonight, or going out to a restaurant the next night, or having a group of people to come over. I want you to totally suspend everything and be totally present in your listening. And what I've also found, and I'm going to quote it very badly, but I think that you'll get the message. In 1997, the AAA, magazine, this magazine that senior citizens get, and I didn't think I should be getting the magazine because I wasn't that old, that's what I thought. But in that issue of that magazine, it cited to be able to get your deepest feelings out to a true listener, aids the cardiovascular system and boosts the immune system. And it's one other physical thing that happens to the body. So you see, when you are in that space of totally listening, you're aiding the not only mental, spiritually, but you're aiding the physical well-being of another human being. And if you could show up and be that, that's a lot. Work on yourself, be a true listener. Third, dare to make take that risk to make your world look different. If your world is full of all one color people, dare to take the risk to change that. And I know that's a very frightening thing for a lot of people, to be the only one of a defined group in a space. But you see, I long for that. I long to go in spaces where nobody looked like me. So that's what I would want your audience to take away.
Well, I don't want to speak after we've talked about listening, Cherry. But what I do want to do is to invite people to make this a beginning of a commitment to listening. People think that dialogue is about talking, but mostly it's about listening. And we have listening circles around the world that we start with the listening. And if there was ever a moment where I believe the listening can start the healing and the dialogue footing, we are standing in that moment of possibility to meet each other there. So One Island Institute is a partner in something that has emerged during this COVID time and beyond, called the Pangea Challenge. Pangea was considered the supercontinent. The root word literally is Greek. Pan in Greek means all, entire, whole, and Gea means earth, so whole earth. There's been a whole earth alert, and we're standing in a whole earth challenge. So we're forming our invitations into challenges to become whole together. What's your challenge? What's your whole earth challenge? Leave us with a challenge for today and the opportunity to continue this listening and conversation in the weeks ahead.
I would challenge you for the next 2 weeks to find somebody that looked totally different from you and begin a conversation. That's what I would challenge you to do. The next thing that I would say to you, since we've been in this business for 31 years, I hope that you would look us up. You could Google my name, Cherry Steinwender, and it'll get you there. Or either you can type in www.centerhealingracism.org, and hopefully that way you'll get a chance to attend some of those Zoom workshops we're putting on, regardless of what part of the world you're in. And so I'll look forward to seeing you. And with that said, internalize oneness. You see, Kimberly didn't ask me what that meant, but every email I sent out, I had internalized oneness at the end of the script. Internalized oneness for me is, for most of us, we have that thing in our head, oh yeah, we all members of the same human family, it's up here. But we haven't moved it down into the heart. We haven't truly internalized that we are one people, that we are all Homo sapiens sapiens, and that we are all have almost a little over 90% DNA in common. That's what I want. That's what I really want, is to internalize oneness. Thank you so much, Kimberly.
It has been my honor, Cherry.
Until the next time.
Yes, to be continued.
Yes.
Let us all embrace this challenge to internalize oneness. Thank you, Cherry.
Thank you. And I'm leaving the meeting.